When Michael Jackson suddenly stopped singing mid-verse during Billie Jean at the Los Angeles Memorial Coliseum that sweltering August night in 1988, 87,000 fans thought something had gone terribly wrong. The king of pop never stopped performing, ever. But what happened in the next 10 minutes would become the most talked about moment in concert history, and it all started with a secret that Michael had been keeping from everyone, including his own band. What none of those 87,000 people knew was that just 3 hours earlier, Michael had been pacing nervously in his dressing room, clutching a crumpled piece of paper in his trembling hands. On that paper was a phone number he had been carrying in his wallet for 6 months, Stevie Wonder's private line. Michael had called that number dozens of times over the past year, but he had never pressed the final digit. Tonight was different. Tonight, something inside him had finally broken through the wall of fear that had kept him from making that call. "Quincy, I need to ask you something," Michael had whispered to his longtime producer, who was visiting backstage. "Do you think I'm crazy for wanting to call Stevie? I mean, what if he says no? What if he thinks I'm just some kid trying to ride his coattails?" Quincy Jones, who had seen Michael transform from a shy child into the biggest star on the planet, had never seen him this vulnerable. "Michael," Quincy had said gently, "Stevie Wonder has been asking about you for years. Every time I see him, he mentions how proud he is of what you've become. You're not that scared little boy from Gary anymore. You're Michael Jackson." But Michael was that scared little boy from Gary, at least in his own mind. Despite selling millions of records and commanding stadiums full of screaming fans, he still felt like an imposter sometimes, still wondered if he deserved to share space with legends like Stevie Wonder. The phone call he made that afternoon had changed everything. The Bad World Tour was already legendary. Michael had been performing for nearly 2 hours, his sequined military jacket catching every beam of light as he commanded the massive stage with that supernatural grace that had made him the biggest star on the planet. The crowd had been on their feet since the opening notes, screaming themselves hoarse, completely surrendering to the magic that only Michael Jackson could create. But tonight was different. Tonight, Michael had a plan that not even his closest confidants knew about. Behind the scenes, chaos was brewing. Michael's security team was in a frenzy because their carefully orchestrated plan had been thrown out the window. Frank DeLeo, Michael's manager, was frantically trying to reach someone, anyone who could explain why Michael had suddenly decided to improvise during the most important show of the tour. The backup dancers were confused, the lighting crew was scrambling to adjust their cues, and the sound engineers were desperately trying to figure out how to accommodate whatever Michael had planned. But Michael wasn't thinking about logistics or protocols. He was thinking about a conversation he'd had with his mother, Catherine, just that morning. "Michael," she had said during their weekly phone call, "you've achieved everything you dreamed of. But when was the last time you did something just because it felt right in your heart? When was the last time you surprised yourself?" Her words had hit him like lightning. When was the last time he had surprised himself? When was the last time he had taken a risk, not because it would sell records or please executives, but because it felt like the right thing to do? That question had haunted him throughout the day, and now, standing in front of 87,000 people, he knew the answer. As the familiar bass line of Billie Jean began pumping through the stadium sound system, Michael moved to center stage, his white glove catching the spotlight. The audience erupted as always, but then something unprecedented happened. Halfway through the first verse, Michael raised his hand and the music stopped. Complete silence fell over the Coliseum like a blanket of disbelief. 87,000 people held their breath, wondering if their idol was having some kind of breakdown. "Ladies and gentlemen," Michael's voice carried across the stadium without amplification, somehow reaching every corner of that massive space. His tone was different tonight, not the usual showman's confidence, but something deeper, more vulnerable. "Sometimes in life, you have moments that you know will change everything. Tonight, I'm having one of those moments." The crowd began to murmur, a ripple of confusion and excitement spreading through the stadium like wildfire. Michael had never spoken to his audience like this before. He was known for his explosive performances and shy interviews, but this raw honesty was something entirely new. "You see," Michael continued, walking to the edge of the stage, his eyes scanning the sea of faces before him. There's someone backstage tonight who taught me everything I know about music, about soul, about what it means to touch people's hearts with a song. And I just realized that I can't finish this show without bringing him out here to share this moment with all of you. The murmur grew louder, anticipation crackling through the air like electricity before a lightning strike. Michael turned toward the side of the stage, and even from hundreds of feet away, people could see his genuine smile, the kind that transformed his entire face and reminded everyone why they had fallen in love with him in the first place. This wasn't planned. My band doesn't know what's coming next. My managers are probably having heart attacks right now, Michael said with that rare laugh that only emerged when he was truly happy. But sometimes the best moments in life are the ones you don't plan. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the man who showed me that music isn't just entertainment. It's healing. Mr. Stevie Wonder. The roar that erupted from 87,000 throats was unlike anything the Coliseum had ever contained. It was pure joy given voice, a sound so powerful that it seemed to lift the roof itself. But what shocked everyone wasn't just Stevie's appearance. It was how he appeared. Stevie Wonder emerged from the wings, but he wasn't being guided by security or assistance. He was walking confidently, purposefully, straight toward Michael with the biggest smile anyone had ever seen on his face. In his hand, he carried something that would become legendary in music history, a small silver harmonica that caught the stage lights like a star. When Stevie reached Michael at center stage, something magical happened. These two icons of music, these men who had conquered the world with their talent, embraced like brothers who had been separated for years. The crowd's cheering somehow grew even louder, but it was different now. Not just excitement, but emotion. People throughout the stadium began to cry without knowing exactly why. Stevie leaned into the microphone that Michael adjusted for him, his voice cutting through the noise with that unmistakable warmth and power that had made him a legend. "Los Angeles," Stevie called out, and the response was immediate and overwhelming. Michael called me up tonight and said, "Stevie, I want to do something crazy." And you know what? I said, "Let's go crazy together." The crowd erupted again, but Michael raised his hand for silence. When the stadium quieted, he spoke with an intimacy that made 87,000 people feel like they were sitting in his living room. "Stevie and I, we've been friends since we were kids," Michael said, his arm around Stevie's shoulders. "But tonight, I wanted to share something with all of you that we've never done before. We've never performed together on stage. Never. And I realized that was crazy, because this man right here taught me that music isn't about competition. It's about connection." What happened next would be replayed on news broadcasts around the world, but no camera could capture the full magic of the moment. A piano was quickly wheeled onto the stage, and Michael took his place behind it. His fingers found the keys, and the opening notes of "You Are the Sunshine of My Life" floated across the stadium. What the audience didn't know was that this song held special significance for both men. Years earlier, when Michael was just 15 and struggling with the pressures of fame, Stevie had called him after hearing about his anxiety attacks. "Kid," Stevie had said in that warm, wise voice of his, "whenever you feel lost, remember that you are somebody's sunshine. Maybe you can't see it right now, but you light up rooms just by walking into them. Don't let anybody dim that light." Michael had never forgotten those words, and choosing this song tonight wasn't random. It was his way of saying thank you to the man who had helped him through one of the darkest periods of his young life. As he played those opening chords, he could almost hear Stevie's voice from that phone call all those years ago, reminding him that his worth wasn't measured by album sales or critical reviews, but by the joy he brought to people's lives. The irony wasn't lost on him that here he was, the so-called king of pop, learning about confidence and self-worth from a man who had been blind since birth, but who saw more clearly than anyone Michael had ever met. Stevie had taught him that real vision came from the heart, not the eyes, and that the most important performances weren't the ones captured on film, but the ones that touched souls. But this wasn't the version anyone knew from the radio. This was intimate, raw, just piano and voice, and a profound connection between two musical souls who had grown up together in the extraordinary pressure of fame, but had somehow remained fundamentally human. Stevie's voice joined Michael's in harmony, their vocals blending in ways that seemed to defy the laws of physics. Michael sang the verses with a tenderness that made even the strongest hearts in that crowd break a little, while Stevie's voice filled in the spaces between words with pure emotion. But it was what happened next that no one who was there would ever forget. As they reached the chorus, Michael stepped away from the piano and walked to where Stevie stood. Without a word, he placed his hand on Stevie's shoulder, and together they sang directly to the crowd, their voices intertwining in perfect harmony. The spotlight caught tears streaming down faces throughout the audience. People who had come for a concert but found themselves witnessing something much more profound. In section 14, row 23, a young girl named Sarah held her mother's hand so tightly that her knuckles turned white. She had begged her parents for months to buy these tickets, and now she was watching her hero share the stage with another legend, their voices creating something that felt almost sacred. Around her, grown men wiped their eyes without shame, and mothers held their children closer, knowing that this was a moment that would live in their family stories forever. The song continued and Michael began to improvise, his voice soaring above Stevie's steady melody, with runs and inflections that seemed to come from somewhere beyond conscious thought. "You are the sunshine of my life," he sang, but the way he sang it, looking out at all those faces, made it clear that he was singing not just the song, but his truth. These people, this moment, this shared experience of pure musical joy, this was his sunshine. Stevie, as if reading Michael's heart, raised the harmonica to his lips and began to play a solo that seemed to capture every emotion in that stadium and reflect it back amplified. The sound echoed off the concrete walls and ceiling, creating layers upon layers of melody that wrapped around every person there like a warm embrace. Then Michael began to dance. Not the sharp, choreographed moves his fans expected, but something fluid and spontaneous, his body moving to rhythms only he could hear. The crowd swayed as one entity, 87,000 people moving together in perfect synchronization without any instruction or direction. It was as if the music itself had become a living thing, connecting every heart in that stadium to every other heart. In the VIP section, celebrities who had come to see a show found themselves just as moved as the teenagers in the nosebleed seats. Music in that moment had erased every boundary that society had tried to build. Age, race, social status, none of it mattered. There was only the song, the harmony, and the incredible realization that two of music's greatest voices were creating magic together in real time. As the song drew to its close, Michael and Stevie stood together at the center of the stage, their voices joined one final time in harmony that seemed to hang in the air even after they stopped singing. The silence that followed lasted only a heartbeat, but in that heartbeat, 87,000 people shared something that would connect them forever. Then the applause began. Not the wild screaming of earlier, but something deeper, more profound. It was the sound of gratitude, of recognition that they had witnessed something unrepeatable and precious. Michael pulled Stevie into an embrace that the cameras caught, and that would be replayed on news broadcasts around the world. But what the cameras couldn't capture was the way that embrace seemed to represent something larger. Friendship transcending competition, talent celebrating talent, and love making itself visible in a world that often seemed to have forgotten how to show it. But the most shocking moment was still to come. As the applause continued, Stevie stepped back from Michael and raised the silver harmonica he had been carrying. The stadium fell silent again, sensing that something significant was about to happen. "Michael," Stevie said into the microphone, his voice carrying clearly across the hushed crowd, "you gave me something tonight that I'll never forget. You gave me the chance to share music the way it's supposed to be shared, from the heart, with no barriers, no expectations, just pure love." He pressed the harmonica into Michael's gloved hand, and the gesture was so simple, so genuine, that people throughout the stadium began crying again. "This harmonica belonged to my grandfather," Stevie continued, his voice thick with emotion. "He taught me that music isn't about the instrument, it's about the soul behind it. Tonight I want you to have it, because your soul shines brighter than anyone I've ever known." What Stevie didn't tell the crowd was the rest of his grandfather's story. His grandfather, Henry, had been born into slavery but had taught himself to play harmonica using a broken instrument he'd found in a field. Henry used to say that music was the one thing that couldn't be taken away from a person, no matter how dire their circumstances. He had passed that philosophy down to young Stevie Morris, along with the belief that true musicians had a responsibility to use their gifts to heal, not just entertain. My grandfather used to tell me, Stevie had whispered to Michael during their brief backstage conversation earlier, that when you find someone who understands that music is medicine, you share your most precious tools with them. Tonight, I'm sharing his most precious tool with you. The harmonica represented more than just an instrument. It was a symbol of musical legacy, of the unbroken chain of artists who had used their talents to bring light into dark places. By giving it to Michael, Stevie was officially welcoming him into a brotherhood that transcended fame or commercial success. He was acknowledging Michael as a true healer, a musician whose gift went far beyond entertainment. Michael stared at the small instrument in his hand, clearly overwhelmed. He brought it to his lips and played a single clear note that carried across the stadium like a prayer. That note seemed to contain everything, all the love and joy and connection that had just passed between not two, but three parties in this relationship. Michael, Stevie, and the 87,000 souls who had witnessed their communion. The crowd exploded one final time, but this wasn't just applause. It was celebration, gratitude, and pure human joy all rolled into one deafening roar of appreciation. Michael raised the harmonica above his head, and the cheering somehow grew even louder. As Stevie made his way back to the wings, he paused and turned back to Michael one more time. Even from their seats high in the stadium, people could see the conversation, could see Michael laugh at something Stevie said, could see the genuine affection between these two men who had grown up in the extraordinary pressure of fame, but had somehow managed to remain fundamentally human. The rest of the concert continued, but everyone knew that what they had just experienced was the real climax of the evening. Michael performed Man in the Mirror with an intensity that seemed to draw from what had just happened. And when he sang about making a change, looking at yourself, every person in that stadium felt like he was singing directly to them. During We Are the World, people throughout the stadium began linking arms with strangers, swaying together, singing together, creating the kind of unity that the song had always promised, but that rarely materialized in real life. Section by section, row by row, the entire Coliseum became one voice, one heart, one moment of perfect human connection. As the concert drew to its close, Michael returned to the center of the stage one final time. He still held Stevie's harmonica in his gloved hand, and he raised it to the crowd once more. "Los Angeles," he said, his voice carrying easily across the now quiet stadium. "Tonight you gave me something I will carry with me forever. The gift of sharing music, of sharing love, of being reminded that we are all connected by something bigger than ourselves." His words hung in the air, and people found themselves holding their breath, not wanting this moment to end. This harmonica that Stevie gave me tonight, it's not just an instrument. It's a symbol of what happens when hearts connect through music. And I want you to remember this feeling, this connection, and take it with you when you leave here tonight. But Michael wasn't finished. He had one more secret to share, one more truth that he had been carrying in his heart for years. "You know," he continued, his voice softer now, more intimate, "people always ask me what it's like to be called the king of pop. And honestly, sometimes it feels like too much pressure, like I'm wearing a crown that doesn't really fit." The stadium was silent, hanging on every word. This wasn't the confident showman they were used to seeing. This was Michael Jackson, vulnerable and real. But tonight, sharing this stage with Stevie, I realized something. Music doesn't have kings or queens. Music has family. And tonight, I got to perform with my musical father, my inspiration, my friend. That's worth more than any title anyone could ever give me. As he spoke, something remarkable began to happen. People throughout the stadium started to understand that they weren't just watching a concert. They were witnessing a moment of profound human connection. They were seeing two of the world's biggest stars remind each other, and everyone watching, that fame and success meant nothing without love, without community, without the courage to be vulnerable with one another. Years later, long after that summer night had passed into memory, people would still talk about the concert where Michael Jackson stopped his show to bring Stevie Wonder on stage. They would tell their children and grandchildren about the moment when two of music's greatest voices joined together in harmony that seemed to come from heaven itself. The harmonica that Stevie gave Michael that night became one of his most treasured possessions. He would keep it with him always, sometimes taking it out during quiet moments and playing that single clear note that had echoed across the Los Angeles Memorial Coliseum. Friends who knew him well said that whenever he played it, his face would take on the same expression it had worn that night: pure joy, pure gratitude, pure recognition of the miracle that music could create when hearts were truly open. That spontaneous moment of musical magic proved something that both Michael and Stevie had always believed, but rarely been able to demonstrate so powerfully. That music isn't just entertainment, it's healing, it's connection. It's the universal language that speaks directly to the soul, reminding us that despite all our differences, we are fundamentally the same. Human beings capable of extraordinary beauty when we come together in harmony.